moving on to the next topic, we're on to the film discussion portion of the show. So anyone who's tuning in for the first time, unfamiliar with how this works, I used to have a YouTube show where I would recommend like 10 movies every month to people, just stuff that I had seen lately that I thought was interesting, but obviously when you show footage on YouTube, you get copyright striked all the time, and I also just hated the sound of my own voice reading off of a really badly written script, so I decided it wasn't worth it, and I ended the series, but I still wanted to do film discussion, so that's why we have this podcast. So every episode, I recommend the guest a movie, the guest recommends me a movie, and we discuss. So I guess going off of the vein of creepypasta and horror-based production, one movie that I've kind of been interested in talking about with other people for a while now, and I thought, why not talk about it with someone else who really appreciates a good horror story, the film adaptation of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by André Øvredal. So, what did you think of that movie?
Yeah, this movie's been on my radar for a while. Like, I've been just needing an excuse to see it because I was morbidly curious. Like, I grew up with the books when I was a kid, so I was wondering how they would adapt it. And honestly, I was pleasantly surprised by it. It's better than I thought it would be.
Yeah, no, I guess just for anyone who hasn't seen the movie yet, and don't worry, we won't spoil it yet. We will be having spoilers, but we won't be getting into those just quite yet. The plot involves a group of kids who live in this small town, I guess canonically not too far away from where I live in Pennsylvania, because,
Really?
yeah, no, because there's a scene where it's kind of a little touchy. The asylum that they mention at one point, Pennhurst Asylum, is a real...
Oh, yeah.
That's a real asylum in Pennsylvania that actual bad things happened at, so that is kind of a little controversial, but yeah, no, it is. So it's about these kids who live in this like small Pennsylvania town, or it's around Halloween, and they find a book of scary stories written by a ghost of a girl who was killed 100 years ago or something like that, and they, I guess, disturb her final resting place, and the stories start to come to life, and they're all modeled after different stories that were popular in the book, which I thought was an interesting way of going about it, because I had always kind of wanted to do that, like one of my like I had mentioned earlier, one of my vain like script ideas that I really wanted to try and do at some point was, I had it in my head that I really wanted to do a kind of like an anthology film of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, where yeah, like, because I feel like that, like the fact that it is kind of like it's all like they have nothing to do with each other would make the most sense. How I had it,
just a bunch of like campfire stories, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So how I had it in my head was what I would have wanted to do was have like hour and a half, like to 2 hours maybe maximum, of like the stories with the most substance fleshed out a little bit, but have them all like animated shorts, not all necessarily in the style of the drawings, but like each short may be done in a different animation style that like lends itself to, I guess, whatever story is being told. But I think like, so that was one reason why I was kind of apprehensive about seeing it. But my younger brother, who was a really big fan of the books, he went out and saw it and was like, "Oh no, it's not as bad as you think. It's actually pretty decent." So I watched it, and like you, I was very pleasantly surprised. So in regards to, I guess, the stories they told, were you kind of you said you were pleasantly surprised with its presentation, but I guess elaborate more on that.
Well, the way I thought the stories would be like told is, as you said, you want to do anthology. I thought it was going to be like an anthology film where they would just show unrelated clips that are linked together somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But making it centered around a book and about a bunch of scary images, I thought was a very smart way of handling it.
Mm-hmm. And there's definitely a lot of tie-ins back to the book, whether direct or indirect. Like that melody that they keep on singing is like one of those scary songs that was in one of the books. There's like small references to other stories that maybe weren't overtly shown like there's like instances where they combine kind of like I think they took the Who Has My Toe monster and another monster from just a random other story and kind of combined them into one, just because the visual was so striking. But
yeah, I remember thinking that like when I watched it, like seeing the Big Toe story changed up a little bit, which was very effective.
Yeah,
in the execution.
That's one of the ones that I'm a little bit iffy on. like
really?
I'm glad that they're I think that they did a good job bringing like the tone of the stories to life and a lot of the visuals kind of creating them in how they would look in a 3D space, but in terms of picking the stories, I think that they could have done maybe a little bit better. Like, I mean, the Big Toe, like, I mean, yeah, that's iconic, but that was one that just never, and I guess it just boils down to subjectivity, but that one just was always kind of like silly to me. I don't know.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I remember my mother telling me about the Big Toe story. Like, cause that's an old, like, folk tale that my grandparents would tell my mom told me. I remember just thinking that was just a silly story. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
A lot of the scary stories are just kind of folk tales that parents would tell their kids to scare them. And
right, yeah. No, but I definitely, because, like, yeah, it's like you said, they had, and the whole reason those books were written was, like, the author just wanted to preserve, like, folklore of, like, different areas. But, like, I had never really heard a case of any of, like, those stories being told, like, as folklore. I mean, obviously, like, the ones that, like the high beams thing where like you have the guy driving behind the girl and he flashes the lights every time the killer comes up, or the killer's calling from inside the house. Those ones are obviously like the stereotypical, like every town has a story like that. But I never knew the Big Toe had like a group of people that still like told that regularly.
Yeah. It's very classical. It's a bit more goofy than the movie let on. It's very very silly. Like the toe ends up in the garden or something like that. I don't remember it fully. I just remember seeing it in the movie and thinking like, wow, my mom would probably go nuts for this.
Did you tell her about it afterwards?
Not yet, but I told my brother, who's probably gonna tell her.
Oh boy, that'd be a fun reaction. But yeah, no, that was the only one that really kind of like bothered me that they included it, just because it seemed kind of a little bit weird. But
the weird one for me was the Jangly Man, the Mitai Dotri Walker.
Yeah, because that wasn't. That creature wasn't like from the actual stories, but that like that little sequence where like the head down the chimney was.
Yeah, and then it just kind of took off on its own, just crazy route that just seemed a little out of place in my book.
Yeah. I get that they kind of needed to have like some sort of like big bad monster for like the third act or whatever, but I thought that was handled kind of well, but I do see what you mean, where like there wasn't really much like substance to it. It didn't really have much to do with the story. And like the one thing that I thought was really interesting that about the movie kind of as a whole is that and the one sequence in the movie particularly, I feel like it did a really good job of communicating like things that scare younger kids specifically, like not necessarily like I think that horror movies a lot will emphasize like one big bad guy or like one big external force that you need to overcome, and there's not really a lot of movies that kind of stew in this idea that like like this kind of nightmare logic where like no matter what you do you can't overcome the scary things or the force or whatever that's coming after you. And I think the one sequence in the movie that did it very well was the red hallway sequence.
I love that sequence.
Mm-hmm. I think the lead up to it was that's why I really wanted to kind of like hash this out with someone else, is because it's very like a love-hate relationship with this movie, because the lead up to that sequence is so stupid. But
definitely.
But the actual sequence itself is like it is like the stuff of nightmares. It's like no matter what you do, you can't get away, and there's no explaining it. It's just like you're stuck in it whether you like it or not, and it's so unsettling.
I thought it was just really weird where the kid just out of nowhere mentioned a weird nightmare he had.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I
It's
hated that so much.
Yeah,
It's
but then the situation happened. And he kept running down the hallways, and all it did was just get closer and closer. That just like got my heart going.
yeah. No, that was I really like that sequence up from like when that the old timey like record player thing is like playing and the girl's like run all you want while you still can, like that from there up until when the friends find his like pen or whatever like that. It was really good. The Herald sequence too.
The Herald
Yeah.
sequence was brutal.
Again, operating very much on like that nightmare logic where it's like no matter what happens, you can't. There's no escape. This like weird kind of feeling of hopelessness. But yeah, no, it was the Herald sequence. I feel like they almost kind of I feel like they almost used their best gag a little bit too early. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
that was like a very very visceral scene, and and to like have that be like the first kill, I feel like is very kind of like they wasted not like wasted, but they used their most effective stuff too early. I feel like.
Yeah, I definitely thought the kills got a little bit watered down after that because having a kid stabbed and then keep going with that was pretty genius in the book. Like having there be more than just him dying. That the straws coming out of him, just how painful it was.
Yeah.
It got under my skin, but then the movie just doesn't do that after that.
Right. Except for like that the Red Room sequence, which I thought was like if I'm comparing like my favorite bits out of the whole movie, I think that the Red Room and then Harold I think is where it's most effective. The big toe is kind of like the weakest part of
Definitely.
the movie for me. Like I love the idea of like something is like coming after you slowly and you hear it coming and like and there's nothing you can do. Like that's a very effective concept for me, but like the just something about the fact that it's a toe in a stew is just like it just breaks the immersion. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, definitely. There's not a lot of stakes during the Toe scene. Like, he just didn't believe him. Toe and Stu then run away. There's nothing much there. There's nothing. There's no sign of danger except for the fact something's going to happen to him.
Right. And then
There's no looming threat.
Exactly, yeah. So then I guess before we get into spoilers, one thing that I kind of talked a little bit about with my brother before I had the idea to have this as an episode on the podcast, but are there any stories that were in the book that you really wish that they had included that they didn't?
Ugh. I was actually pretty satisfied with everything. I remember the big stories that I remember were the Pale Lady and Mitai Dotri Walker, and I was just kind of let down by the Mitai Dotri Walker thing.
Yeah, it's just kind of like that one element, and then that's it.
Yeah, and I read the books too long ago to remember much.
Gotcha.
Any specific details.
I remember that one thing, I forget who said it, but I was talking about the books with somebody, I was listening to someone talk about them on YouTube or something like that. But they said that were it not for the pictures, then nobody would really remember the books at all. I feel
definitely. I remember when I read the books like a few years ago. I bought them at a garage sale and started reading my friend. And we remember we discussed that these stories are kind of stupid, looking at it from like a 20-year-old perspective.
Exactly, yeah. But it's just still like there's still pictures in the first book especially where like I still just cannot look at them. Like it still unnerves me that much. Like I don't know if you're familiar. Like I think it was in the first book. The story was called The Thing, where it's like this like skeleton with like these really tiny like peering eyes. Like I think
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll actually hear. You know what? Hold on. Because I know if I Google it, it'll be the first thing that comes up. I'll send you a picture so you have a reference. But yeah, it's that one. The witch story from the first one, where like the guy is like driving the nail into the heart of the tree or whatever to get a witch to leave him alone. That one really freaked me out. I think another reason why the Red Room sequence was so effective is because that particular image was the one that freaked me out a lot. But
right. Definitely.
So yeah, here's is it working? Yeah, we'll just pause for a second so you have a reference. There we go. Okay, so yeah, that's the one that freaks me out the most.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
So yeah, like the pictures are kind of what sell the book, and there was a big outrage a few years, kind of getting a little bit off track, but there was a big outrage because they did a reissue of the books a few years ago where it was the same stories, but a different illustrator did the pictures. And it was it was the same guy who did the series of Unfortunate Events pictures. So, and
Really?
there was there was a huge, I forget his name, Brett Helquist, I think. It was still like scary pictures, but I mean like nowhere near as as terrifying. And there was a huge outrage for the original illustrations to come back. And I think that like the newer editions of the book have the old illustrations put back in. So. I guess that it just speaks to it that there's a huge fan base for these stories. But
speaking of the images, I remember one image became a big creepypasta image. Going back to that, the one with the half of a skeleton face with like that's, I don't know how to describe it. I'll send you a photo.
Oh, okay. I think I might know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it was one of the covers of the book for a while, but that image just. Here it is. I remember seeing that constantly when I was when I was younger.
Right, yeah, no, I think that's the one that they used for either the toe monster and you only see it for a split second, or they used I remember seeing something that like that creature in specific was in the movie at some point, but I don't remember if it was like the ghost of the girl or if it was the toe monster or
I think it might have been a toe monster because I remember something flashing, but I didn't go back to check on it.
Mm-hmm. And fun fact, I also found out, I was doing some reading before we recorded, but the toe monster is played by the same I don't remember the name of the guy, but he's like a famous he's famous specifically for horror movies because he's like a contortionist, and he is like able to do, he was like the same guy who did Mama from that Guillermo del Toro movie.
Oh, he talked about Doug Jones.
No, it's a different guy. It's like a weird, I think like a Ukrainian name or something like that.
Oh, the guy because the guy with like long fingers or whatever. So I remember that was like a defining feature. Yeah.
He played the toe monster. I think he did a couple. He might have been the jangly man for like the actual practical parts as well. But but that's actually another thing to touch on too. Is like one thing that I was a really big fan of is that a lot of things in the movie were done practically with very few CGI enhancements. Because one thing that I mentioned back in the first episode, and then we touched on it a little bit in the third episode, is that I'm definitely not one of those people that are like, oh, practical is always better than CGI. It's special effects in general are a tool that should enhance your movie, and it doesn't, like, however you do it, as long as it's realistic and it's a well done effect, however you do it is fine. But I think that the state of things today is that there is a very kind of the industry favors CGI way more than practical, and I think that it should be looked at as like more of a, well, what's more appropriate for this job, rather than just saying, okay, we'll just throw it all into a computer later and figure it out then. But I did really appreciate how a lot of the creatures were practical with CGI enhancements rather than putting everything in later. It definitely gives them more of a presence, I find, and like in story and in making a horror movie. If you believe that something is there, it's obviously way more effective than having that doubt, I guess.
Yeah, a good example is like the pale lady from the Red Room sequence. The way she walks, the way she moves has definite weight to it because she is a heavy character.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember seeing a behind the scenes photo of just the costume, just how like detailed and good it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And like the only CG I think they did is just make her mouth move a little bit.
Yeah, it was like her mouth. I think like some veins or something in her face. Like there was, I think they like made her like I don't know how to word. Like they made her kind of like wet in a weird way. Like they added like moisture or whatever to like her skin to like make her kind of look. I don't know. Like it's just
like she has like living parts.
Right. Yeah. And then obviously, I mean, the Jangly Man is like a pretty 50-50, like CGI versus practical. But when he is actually physically there, like it's unnerving. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Harold especially too is also very I like that they the way that they handled him. Like it just like kind of very robotic, and it doesn't like he never has a facial expression or anything like that. But
I do like that, like the fact they didn't really give him a facial expression. They kept him kind of looking like a scarecrow that just moved. Didn't like have it didn't look angry. It just kind of looked dead.
Yeah, it was definitely a good choice. But the one thing that I kind of you touched on it a little bit, and again we can start to get into spoilers now because I feel like we've talked a lot about the different elements about this movie. I don't want this to be the whole episode, but one thing that you had said was you had found the books and you were reading them with a friend of yours, and you're like, oh man, these are just not scary. And I definitely agree. Like reading them now, if it's just like you or like someone else in your age group, it's like, oh man, this is not scary at all. This is kind of bad. But like, I think that one thing that is kind of lost on us now is that when we were younger reading those stories, like they were like that's just what scared us at that particular time period. Whether I think like they're recommended from like 5th grade to like 7th grade is like the recommended reading level for those books or something like that. But I think that the one thing that was interesting was I thought of it like that's kind of like what, let's say 10 years from now we're looking back on like our like favorite creepypastas that we like to read, or like our favorite horror movies right now. We're probably not going to look at them unless it's a really effective story or a really effective movie. We won't look at it with the same fear or the same I don't know, the same kind of gut reaction that we have to it. I think the fact that like we have all those years of context and perspective now kind of give us like the ability to look back and kind of see what was scary and what wasn't. And I think that one thing that I was interested that I kind of reflected on after the fact was when I saw the promotional material for the movie, I was looking at it like this is a movie trying to appeal to me, like cashing in on the nostalgia of my childhood, and it just looks bad. And then when I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh no, this is very clearly made for like kids, like 10 to 13-year-old kids. That like I'm not gonna like this is just not scary. But then the thing that I thought was, well, that those books were not trying to appeal to adults. Those books were trying to scare kids. And it's just purely whether it's the pictures or the fact that we really like those stories as kids, they carried into adulthood with us. But that movie is gonna be what those books were to us for kids that are in that age group now. If that makes any sense.
That makes total sense. I get where you're going with that. With the PG-13 horror aspect of it, it did really well for like what it was restricted to, and good enough to probably make kids scared now, but like us as adults probably wouldn't be as too bothered by it.
Right. And I actually kind of appreciate it more because it like I said, there's a lot of movies out there, especially today, that are made because they're meant to be like nostalgic cash grabs on things that appealed to people of our generation or maybe a step or two older than us, trying to bring in people purely off of nostalgia. And I think this movie definitely was trying to do that to an extent, but that wasn't its sole focus. Like there's a lot of love put into this film. Like people who are making it definitely wanted to make a good scary stories movie, and it's reflecting really well on the project. Right. Yeah. And again, like I that's not to say like it's still not for me. Like I can recognize, okay, this is not something that was made with the intent to scare me. This for someone of my age, this is meant to be like, oh, you remember these stories, right? Like look at what these nods and these little references we're putting in for you. But it primarily is meant to be like a gateway horror film for people, and like so kids of that age group today are gonna watch that. And then they might be inclined to go back and find the books, and then they'll be like, oh man, I want more. And then they find out what creepypasta is, and then they start to get into the more adult horror movies. Like, so I think that it is very, very good because I'm hard pressed to find, like when I'm thinking back on it, I'm hard pressed to think of like scary movies meant for kids that are as brutal or as effective as this movie is. or at least how I can imagine it.
The PG-13 horror market is a bit terrible, to be honest.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, they don't really make horror movies appeal to kids. They just make horror movies and tone down the violence just so they can get more money.
Right.
But this one definitely seems like a horror movie made to be a horror movie at that age.
Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate it for that.
Yeah, so like a 13-year-old can go watch this and say, hey, this is actually kind of good. I kind of like being scared like this. Let me find out what else is out there.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, they'll fall into like the Nightmare on Elm Streets and Friday the 13th and all that jazz.
Right, and on that level, I really respect it. But at the same time, I definitely do have problems with it. Like we said, like there's moments where the writing is just really, really contrived and really are you familiar with the movie Black Dynamite by Scott Sanders?
Vaguely, I have not seen it. I just know about it.
You definitely should. It's a very we talked about it on the podcast, but it's sort of a movie that parodies blaxploitation movies. But one thing that it does very well is that it parodies kind of like writing tropes in general. And there's one gag that they always do, or not always. There's a gag that happens early on where there's two characters in a flashback, and they're just saying dialogue for the sake of like giving context to the audience, and like to the point where like the exact line is the guy goes, "Jimmy, I am 18-year-old Black Dynamite, and you are my 16-year-old kid brother, and you are once again hooked on drugs." So there's a lot of like it's like making fun of dialogue like that, but there's a lot of instances in this movie I find where like again we said the Red Room where he's like, "Guys, I had this dream last night that I was in a red room and there's this woman coming after me. Do you think that that's going to happen to me?" Like, it's just like, there's a lot of moments like that in the movie where I was like, okay, that's I can appreciate what you're trying to do. And yeah, maybe not everyone would necessarily care about that, but like, come on. So yeah, no, there's just a lot of, moments where I wish the writing was better. Like I said, there's different, like I wish they had made a bit of a different selection monster wise or story wise, what they decided to incorporate. But other than that, I think it's a pretty decent, scary movie for kids.
I agree, honestly. When the horror aspects are there, it's really good. Just when they try to get the plot along, it's not good.
Exactly. I guess last thing, I wanted to touch on before we moved on was what did you think about the fact that they kind of sequel baited?
I'm curious where it's gonna go. I'm all for a sequel. I'll probably check it out, just judging by how much I enjoyed the first one. Mm-hmm. But I don't know where they're gonna go with that.
Yeah, I really hope that it's not like a situation where it's like we have to go into the ghost dimension to save my friends. Like, I almost wish that, like, this is probably going to be taken the wrong way at first, but hear me out. I kind of wish that they would do, like, a human centipede thing, where it's like the second movie has nothing to do with the first movie. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, it's still going with that, that idea of, like, there are elements that are connected, that if let's say this we do get a second movie, I would like it that there is some sort of element. There is like some way that there's like these scary stories from the books that are being told, and maybe like there's creatures coming to life or whatever out of these stories, but not necessarily have it be about the same group of kids. Like, let's just say their story is done, they've ridden off in the sunset, hey, we're gonna go find my friends, and that's the last we hear of them, and then we get like a new group of kids, or like, because like you said, and as it's proven, the stories are from folklore that are all over the world. So yeah, I think it would be interesting if we go to like a different time period or a different region and kind of explore the folklore of that area more.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see them go out of the 60s too, which was a strange like spot to land this story in. Mm-hmm.
If I'm honest, I think that was like purely like a Stranger Things type thing where it's like, definitely, let's set it in the past. I got a lot of Stranger Things vibes out of it. Yeah. But yeah, no, I guess that's that's all I have to say about Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I think it's a very solid horror movie. I watched it on DVD. Let me look up really quick how you can watch this movie if you guys are interested in checking it out. It looks like it's available to rent on Amazon Prime, YouTube, Google Play, and Vudu, all for about $6. I don't know if it's available for free just yet on any other streaming services.
I look, it's not. I just ran to Walmart and got it for like $5.
Okay, gotcha. But yeah, no, so if you're interested in checking it out, definitely watch it. I think it's good for at least one viewing. Even if you're not necessarily into the fact that it's for kids, I think that there are definitely elements to appreciate about it as an adult that I think make it worthwhile.